everybody. Steve Napier, welcome to Circle of Brilliance. Today we're going to pick up where we left off last time around. I believe it was Tim who shared with us a little bit of a model about how two cultures might end up uniting. Yeah, that's what I got right now. So whether it feels good or feels bad, or whether it works or doesn't work, that's for us to explore. But this is the whole thought. What happens when two cultures are coming into interplay of one sort or another? So we'll say that. Let me just show you what the diagram looked like that Tim shared with us. And it has two different axes. The one axis is about valuing and maintaining the host culture. The host culture. And the other one is valuing and maintaining the native culture. So I would really have to understand, or we'll figure out as we look at these four different possibilities, whether they're talking about, are both of these coming in as equal cultures that are trying to figure out how to work together? Is there one, like the host culture, are they trying to absorb the native culture? Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see where we end up from this. So now Tim also sent over a little blurbette. Wait, come back, don't go away. This comes from a model proposed by Barry. So this is a Barry model of integration. 1 second, and I will share with you a little bit more of that content. Well, maybe we can just slide it over here and make it big enough for you guys to all see. So this particular model, Barry proposed a model of acculturation that categorizes individual adaptation strategies along two dimensions. The first dimension concerns the retention or rejection of an individual's native culture. Is it considered to be of value to maintain one's identity and characteristics? The second dimension concerns the adoption or rejection of the host culture. So that tells me that the native culture has been approached one way or another by a host culture, and it's the host culture that will ultimately control the acculturation. Is that how you guys are interpreting this?
Yeah, control, or they're guiding something in terms of, ideology or something to that extent, if that makes sense.
Right. If any of you on the call are also familiar with this model, then by all means do it, or we could do a quick little Google search about Barry and what we call a culture model of acculturation, and maybe we can get something to come up, but hopefully Tim will join our call soon. So, but let's just kind of look at that again. The first dimension is about the retention or rejection of an individual's native culture. So I'm going to kind of frame that as, this is the culture that is second nature to me. This is just how I am, who I am. This is what's the real me. Native to me, I guess, is what I'm saying, as opposed to native to, I don't know, geography. I don't know for sure. But the second dimension concerns the adoption or rejection of the host culture. So let's take a look at the diagram. So if the host culture values and maintains itself, and the value, and at the same time, value and maintaining the native culture is also positive, this is where two can kind of come together as one. So when I think of integration, I think of something that is a blending of mutual respect, hopefully mutual contribution, and there will still be an acknowledgement, an awareness that these things came from distinct places. So I don't think that integration necessarily leads to, or should lead to, a homogenization, if you will. I think that integration still allows a certain level of distinction to exist. So there are things I'm bringing in, there's things you're bringing in. Let's put ourselves all together, bring out the best in one another as far as the idea or whatever might happen to be. That to me feels like what integration would be. And then let me just read their definition of integration, and then I'd like to hear you guys kind of comments on this. Integration occurs when individuals are able to adopt the cultural norms of the dominant or host culture while maintaining their culture of origin. Integration leads to and is often synonymous with biculturalism. So it's a
Mhm.
coming together while remaining distinct.
Right.
Yeah. They've always said that oil and water doesn't mix, but I think if you shake it right, pour it right away, it's going to be a nice blend. So I think that's the whole point. We can remain unique and still be together. All right, you guys, does that resonate with you guys? Yeah.
T, what I'm hearing you say about this in a business context is where an individual is joining an organization and he is he's bringing his own values and his perspective, and he's able to integrate well into the organization, and they appreciate his alignment with their
Yes. Right.
values and goals. Right?
Yeah.
That's the way I
Yeah.
see it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so that I guess brings up the question then, does integration imply that it's going to be a complete merging of the two, or are they simply integrating at certain places where their individual cultures could better support one another? Do I have to be completely integrated, or what do you think?
I don't know that you can be necessarily all at once, right? So I think it's dimensional, like it happens over time. But I think what you described in the last call about there's some kind of understanding of benefit, right? And so I think that's where you operate from, and then it might expand over time. And I've seen this in different businesses and different cultures as I traveled, right? People
Sure,
become
sure.
expats and then they come to a country and there's some integration, and that helps them to function, it helps them to operate. But
Yes.
there's going to be some things that they just may reject.
Mhm.
There's a lack of that kind of thing. So I think it happens over time. I don't think you can just like fully immerse yourself
Right.
all at once. That wouldn't make sense to me. I don't know how you
No,
would do
that
it.
feels, yeah, that feels far more aggressive than allowing a natural process to unfold. Yeah, Boris, what
Mhm.
were you about to say?
I was just going to say that I think what Brian is saying is correct. It's not like a linear, you're 100% or you're 50% integrated. I think it's a continuum. It's kind of like in
Yeah,
a marriage, right? You appreciate the other person's values, belief systems, the way that they work and act with you and interact with you, and vice versa. There's a mutual sharing of the, as Brian called, a benefit, right, between the two individuals.
Yeah,
And that's the level of integration is dependent on how much of that alignment happens.
interesting.
mhm,
I'm glad you brought that up, because the example I wanted to talk about was um, a marriage between two people still represents a merging of cultures.
Mhm.
So, and we've been married for a very long time now. I still think of us as integration, because there are plenty of places where we overlap, but also there's things that are, uniquely Linda, and there are things that are uniquely me. And
right,
there's an allowance for that to occur. There's a support of that. So I guess what I'm saying is, like, when I think of a relationship where integration has occurred or is targeted, um, there's this idea about mutual respect across the entire individual. It's a,
right.
yeah,
And that's a challenge within organizations because they try to make you fit into this like one size fits all kind of
yeah,
perspective, and that
yeah,
doesn't happen. So I'm thinking,
Mhm.
even my father, right? My father's South African, my mom's from Portugal. So you talk about that kind of mix, and then I'm born and raised, or born in Jamaica. So you have all these multicultural, multi
yeah, right.
ethnicity, different languages, all these things coming together. And that's as Boris described, that evolves over time.
Sure it does. Sure it does. And so, again, I think it's interesting that you can apply this concept around cultural and climatization and all that at so many different levels. Because, because we're so focused on the change grid, we know it's activity, it's situational, it's going to change from one moment to the next, depending on whatever's going on and how everyone is thinking and feeling about it. So,
In my mind, the word that comes to mind here is appreciation. It's an appreciation for both the similarities, but also the differences.
Exactly.
know?
Yeah, it's something that can be appreciated, celebrated, allowed to exist and be expressed.
Mhm.
So maybe looking at this when it's yes, yes, that's what everyone is really trying to do. That would appear to be the goal. So, all right, so good enough. Let's work our way around some of these other three. Oh, wait, Kathy, you would also unmuted. Do you want to throw something in? Jim, welcome.
Yeah, no, I'm actually going to be this. I'm going to have to get off probably a little bit early today, just because I am literally going to be teaching this for the next 3 hours to someone from the Philippines, and we're
This
going to be
actual
talking.
model? Is it
Well,
this
not this
actual?
model, but this
Okay.
notion of continuum and helping her adjust to the United States business culture, and
Sure.
and so in the model that I use, integration is at the highest end.
Yeah.
That's the place where, and I think the way it's stated here is, you're maintaining your own culture of origin while adopting what works, the
Mhm.
norms, and being able to function effectively in the host culture, while at the same time maintaining an identity that is healthy for you. I mean, that's how I see integration, and I see the others as a kind of something that we talked about last time, of giving up, of the separation. You're rejecting the dominant culture. You're saying, I'm going to stay here. I'm going to be who I am. I'm going to be in an enclave, and not benefiting from for whatever reason, not benefiting from the culture. But, assimilation is a giving up of self, which is not healthy. I mean, I think people use that term assimilation and they think it means a healthy thing, and it really is not. And then marginalization is also one where their identity is a rejection. So, I mean, of these, I think integration is a healthy place to be, but there's a path along the way where you go back and forth between, rejecting what's new, and then somehow adopting some things, and you may get to the point of assimilation and then realize that assimilation is unhealthy, that you really want to be at integration. So that was, I mean, so I think the order in which he put these things doesn't make sense to me, but I think the concepts are very powerful, the way he describes them.
Yeah. Well, and we're going to have some fun seeing if this overlays. Jim, what did you want to add in?
I was just joining in and
Oh, well, hey
catching up
there. Well,
here.
welcome,
So-
welcome. All right. So now I want to throw another thing into the mix. And because I'm not familiar with Barry's model, I don't know if it gets brought up or not, but I'm also curious about how the power dynamic is going to impact this. So for example, in the explanation about what integration occurs, it says it occurs when individuals are able to adopt the cultural norms of the dominant. You just stop at that word. So dominance implies that someone is in charge of others. Someone's got the power and someone else has to, I don't know, accept that or whatever they do to all that. It doesn't feel like there's an equality that's going on. Or maybe we're saying for integration to occur at its absolute best, this feeling of equality needs to come in, mutual respect. What other words were we using to kind of describe what needs to go in there? An acknowledgement and appreciation for what's going on. Well, what happens when the power dynamic now changes a little bit? And the reason why I'm bringing up the power dynamic is because I think that's going to help you figure out where these things overlay on the change grid as I'm just going to put them now as styles of existence. And we'll see about that. Okay. So let's go into assimilation for a second. So in assimilation, there's a lot of value on the host kind of thing, but the native culture feels very unsupported, not valued, not maintained, so it's gone now. Well, that's assimilation, and I think anyone who's ever watched Star Trek: The Next Generation is fully aware of what the Borg do. So for those who are not brought up to speed on the pop culture of years past, the Borg is a race of people who have become who they are by absorbing other cultures in their entirety. And so they always say that you're going to be assimilated. They are going to take elements of your culture and add it to their perfection, while you are also being completely absorbed into their world. So yeah, that's when I think of assimilation. I think who you are and what you are, it only matters to the degree that I find what you bring to the table to be actually useful to me. Beyond that, you simply need to assimilate. This is the situation that, obviously the people who are being assimilated probably feel about how the person who is doing the assimilation is carrying themselves. Thoughts about
Interesting. It
that?
sounds like an organization.
It sounds like certainly, going back to spiral dynamics, it certainly sounds like that was a phase that things went through. Maybe assimilation preceded integration, and I don't know.
Or
Put
or
these on
some
some
or,
sort of
or some
development.
industries maybe like have, like in healthcare, for instance, there's, the hierarchy between those who have the long white coats and the short white coats,
Yeah, of
and
course, of
that's
course.
understood. The nurses understood, that
Yeah.
they don't try to override physicians, although they, in my opinion, have just as much power.
Right. Well, and I think too, there's also, if we look at the military, I think that when someone first comes into the military,
Mhm.
they know the task is to simply assimilate.
Yeah.
That's what this is all about. You're going to assimilate into our way of doing things. And then as you know how we do things and why we do things, and you move up in the ranks a little bit, and we have an opportunity to really see what you're all about, then yeah, you will probably reach a point where we're going to want you to help contribute to whatever is being discussed and what's
Yeah.
going to, happen in the future.
That's a great example, actually, because being here in the Washington, D.C. area, I speak to a lot of these military officers, and they always tell me how they detrain people, recruits, and what it means to be a civilian.
Mhm. Yep.
Like, so you're not trained to like ask questions, you're trained to do.
Right.
You know?
And, isn't the same thing at the heart of how a family operates? A little kid goes off to kindergarten. What's that kid's job? It's to assimilate.
Yeah.
Once you've assimilated and you're obeying the rules, now you have the opportunity to express yourself and to learn and all those kinds of things. But there's a way we do things around here, and it's not going to match the way mom and dad did things. So you got to
Mhm.
assimilate, right?
Wonder about differentiation
Yeah.
and
Mm.
All right. Tell us
that
about that.
fits. And it's kind of the assimilation, but then, that point where it's okay, now what's my unique offering? What do I bring?
Oh, see, we
Yeah.
got so much fun with words ending with TION right now. Because I
Yeah.
think that what's happening, going back to the military example, is that as those individuals who have assimilated to life in the military continue to advance, perhaps we move from assimilation to some sort of like recognition.
Mhm,
And I'm talking from the host perspective right now.
mhm,
So I'm recognizing that there's something that this individual has that is distinctive. And we should make space for them to share, participate, etc. So I kind of feel that would be a word, if we're going to draw out some sort of a continuum, that between assimilation and integration, there has to be this realization, recognition.
mhm.
Yeah, that they get rewarded for. But then you talk about the spiral dynamics because, continue on with the military example, when they come out of the military, they have to re-assimilate into civilian worlds. And I even seen like how they have challenges with like even their resume and those kinds of things, their languaging, You know, because now they were in, you know, X amount of years and they're trained to not ask questions. Now they come out to the civilian world, into
Yep.
a leadership role. That's different. The languaging, everything's different. They have like CO on their resumes. And we're like, well, what is that referring to? They say, oh, that's commanding officer. I say, okay, if you don't have military experience, no one's going to understand that. You must put
That's right.
like
Yeah.
supervisor, manager.
We
So
need a
they have to
translator here.
re-assimilate.
That's right. That's right. And so I think what we're going to discover as we work our way through this is that in our role as change agents, we should, probably do, have the ability to move people from one of these blocks to a neighboring block. And there's going to be a positive progression then that we probably are going to want to map to. So, for example, right now, we know that to move from assimilation to integration, something has to be done to increase the native culture's perceived value and give opportunity to participate. But I'm sure they feel as though they were assimilated. That has to be, a damage has to have occurred at some level within that person, even if you did nothing more than insult their culture by rejecting it or telling them to set it aside. An injury has occurred. So
If I can,
yeah,
if
go
I
ahead.
can comment here, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No.
I think that there's an historical perspective on this around how Americans have always viewed acculturation is that melting pot concept, which is how we always viewed it, which is really a way of saying assimilation in many ways, that there was an expectation that immigrants would assimilate versus integrate. The notion was always assimilation.
Yep.
And then you've had a whole series of decades, you know, over the last 3 or 4 decades where people have said, no, we don't want to assimilate. We can't assimilate. We still want to have an identity. And they're seeking integration. And I contrast that with, I mean, I studied Canadian multiculturalism that emerged in the 70s, and their concept was not a melting pot concept. They had introduced the whole notion of multiculturalism, which is, whether they were successful or not is another story, but the whole idea was to have different, and they brought in lots and lots of immigrants in the 70s and 80s. And the whole idea was that we will live in harmony in multiple, and it was a much more diversity focused concept. We will live in harmony and come together and have the richness of many different cultures coming together and maintaining their identities. Whereas in the US, maintaining your identity was not a good thing. People were told to lose their language. People were encouraged not to. And encourage, I mean, certainly the worst part, most horrible part of it was slaves and Native Americans. But that was the American, and I'm not saying it to be critical. It's just that it is the historical model I think America has had, so that we're always kind of shocked when people come and say, but no, I want to be who I am, and we don't quite know what to do with that. We don't quite know how to manage that integration, I think. It's just my 2 cents on this based on.
Is that why in America, I never understood this, even when I took the citizenry test. Is that why there's hyphen in everything? You have, you know, African American, you have all these different hyphens, whereas other countries, you don't necessarily have a hyphen. You're just.
Well, that emerged in the 70s and 80s.
Still hold on to your identity as well, I noticed.
Yeah, that emerged in the 70s and 80s when people started becoming aware of the need to explore their own native identities. And so it was a way to acknowledge diversity. So that's a relatively new concept in the US. I mean, relatively new, 30 years maybe.
Wow.
So we didn't always do that. I mean, the expectation was you're an American, you're an American, you're an American. I mean, that's it. And regardless of, and you better be an American, you know, that kind of thing. So that came out of that movement in the 70s and 80s. and through the 90s. So whether there's value to that or not, I don't know at this point, but that's how that emerged.
Yeah, interesting.
Davey,
Yes, yes, go
you
ahead.
know, a very current example could be the law that they just passed in Ontario, Canada.
Or in Quebec,
I'm sorry, Quebec,
right?
that they all must speak French.
Well, that was, I mean, that was my master's thesis
Mhm.
years
Wow.
ago. I mean, that was my master's thesis. It was the Quebecois movement.
Right.
And I did my field work in Montreal on that. And that was Bill 22 that happened, I'm dating myself, in the 70s, late
Wow.
70s, when basically all these immigrants had come to Montreal, and Canada had basically said, you must all speak English. And Quebec, I mean, was in turmoil, and then had passed wanted to pass the law that everyone must speak French. And in the meantime, I mean, I was studying the Italian community there as a microcosm of the rebellion, and did interviews with them, and and spent time with them. But their frustration was that in Quebec, rather than in Toronto, they were being forced to not only not speak English, but now to speak French.
Mhm.
And it impeded their ability to be mobile
Mhm.
in that culture. And so there were riots in the streets, there was all kinds of things happening. And then the French eventually won over the French speakers and said Quebec will be a francophone state, province. But that was this whole turmoil that took place over 50 years now of the original identity was that it was English, and then French, and then a lot of discord with all of the other minority groups there. So it's an example of the French kind of winning. Anyway, I didn't mean to go on about it. It just
No, no,
happens
no.
to be something I spent a lot of time
Well,
studying.
yeah, and
Very,
how
very interesting. Very.
today's our French club meeting, so I'm sure it'll be a big topic of discussion. But yeah, now if you have any interaction with the government, or you are operating a business, the language must be French.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
But
And it alienated most of the other immigrants in Quebec,
Yep. Interesting. Okay, so let me just throw out two little quick thoughts that I had as you guys were talking. The first one is that as I'm looking at these words and I'm looking at the two axes, what I'm kind of noticing is that from the host's perspective, these are the way they are acting or treating others, if you will. These are the realities they're creating. Where on the native culture, it's more like these are what they're accepting. Or how do I really put that? These are the
Responding.
results. Well, no, I'm saying, like, if the host culture doesn't position itself in a way that matters, you get this marginalization sort of thing. It's like you're here, but you really don't exist. You're invisible. You don't call any attention to yourself, and so you don't get any attention. So marginalization occurs when individuals reject both their culture of origin and the dominant host culture. So this is definitely an outsider. Definitely an
I
outsider.
don't know if I understand that one.
Really?
Yeah, because I always thought like marginalization would be the change kind of agents, the revolutionist kind of thing. But I don't know about the
Well,
rejecting your
I will
own
say to you that
culture.
the existence of these marginalized individuals and cultures gives rise to an opportunity for people to reach out, so that individual is no longer separate.
Ah,
So
okay.
that's where I think we're leaning towards. And I'll give you an example of this. I believe the homeless are a great example of a marginalized population.
Got it.
Inside of that population, each individual probably feels very marginalized from
Yeah,
the rest of that culture.
got it.
They're there. We know they're there, but they are ignored. They're become invisible. In fact, in French, there's a word, quidam. Kidam is the word that you use to describe people around you that you have no idea who they really are. So you're just out and about, the crowd around you are described as Kidam. Kidam are faceless people, so even headless people. So the person is invisible to you, they're Kidam. And I think that's what marginalization is really all about. Now, I believe the host culture may deliberately or accidentally be the ones that are creating the marginalization.
The
At the same,
policies.
whatever, right. Where are we
Yeah.
putting our money? Are we trying to work with a marginalized population? What's really going on? So I kind of think that these are the results that the host culture has created, and
Yeah.
the native culture has accepted.
And I could comment here too. I mean, if you think about the Native Americans who were forced to go to English language schools and forced to let go of their culture in the U.S. and Canada throughout all those years, 2 generations back, even a generation back, that was marginalization because they couldn't basically accept the host culture, but they had to reject their own culture.
Mm.
Wow.
Wow.
Interesting. And so then obviously there ended up being groups of some sort or another who started to notice the marginalized communities, started to do things to support that marginalized community, to pull them into the fold, or did they simply allow the marginalization to continue? Yeah, Kathy.
Well, with Native Americans, no. I mean, what you had was examples, exactly what you were saying earlier, T, was the opportunity for people to rise up and say, no, we're not going to take this. And there was a whole series in the 70s and 80s of Native leaders who basically fought the system and were considered violent, and wanted by the United States. And who formed basically following, but where people started acknowledging an ethnic movement essentially among different tribes, and people started rediscovering their languages and rediscovering lost languages and rediscovering lost identity. And that was all occurring in the 70s, 80s, and 90s among those people who had not been destroyed, those cultures that had not already been destroyed
Right.
by that. So yeah.
It's interesting because that, again, is an example of moving from marginalization into living more as a separation. So separation occurs when individuals reject the dominant or host culture in favor of preserving their culture of origin. Separation is often facilitated by immigration to ethnic enclaves. And so certainly as the native populations were encountered and, moved about and, all the stuff that happens, you can see that separation is most definitely occurring. Yet for some reason or another, I think that the host culture begins to recognize that group which was marginalized and then now is allowed to exist separately has certain value, because they were the guides. They knew where everything was. They knew how to, grow the crops that would grow there, or work the fields, or raise the animals, or whatever. They were the fur traders. They knew all the routes of trade and exchange. People started to how to say, acknowledge, have a moment of awakening where they realized that this culture was working just fine without them long before they came on the scene. So, there are lots of things are already in place, so they live separate. And then I know I'm babbling a lot, but I want to figure out, where do you move from separation? Do you move into integration, or do you move into assimilation? Because there's going to be some diagonal movement that's going to cause problems. And here's the example I'll give you, going back to Canada. I forget what year it was. I forget what's been called, but it's become an increasingly in the news sort of subject, that a great many children of First Nations origin were pulled against their will away from parents, against the parents' will, and put into Catholic schools or whatever, and don't know everything that happened there, but something happened, and a great many kids were, died, neglected, or whatever, and are in these group burial grounds around all these old schools. So I assume that's a subject you guys have all heard a little bit about, yeah?
Mhm.
So that's
Yes.
exactly what I was talking about earlier, T. That's exactly that concept of being destroyed, of the culture being destroyed.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's like, look, the
That was
only way that you can ever be integrated is to first be assimilated. Is that what
No,
Kathy is?
I totally, I don't agree with that. I think that, I don't think integration is a necessary outcome of assimilation. I
I
think
don't
that
either. I think
yeah,
rare people are invited in to the inner fold, unless again you've got that person who is driven by a certain nobility that says we are entering this as equals and we are going to work hard as equals to maintain that. Like unless they start off with that integration philosophy as part of their core spirit, I don't know that it's something people are going to get. I suppose anyone can get better at doing it consciously, deliberately, but it's not going to become second nature to them.
Mhm.
So, and I think there's another personality type that's very much into assimilation, and another one that's perfectly happy with separation, and another one that's actually quite happy being marginalized. Because here's the thing, the more marginalized a group becomes, the less being accepted by that group that is marginalizing you becomes of any value to you. I kind of believe there's a lot of marginalized populations out there who are living quite nicely without any involvement with other kind of groups. And I guess the best example I can give you is they believe, and I have no reason to doubt, that there are still native populations living on the African continent who have never had any encounter whatsoever with us, whatever us means.
it's true in South America too. I mean,
Oh, right, there you go. All right,
off the grid is what I call it, off the grid.
right. Now we're marginalizing them because at least we've got the sense to say don't interfere with the natural development of a culture. Leave them be. At least some people are that enlightened right now to just obey the prime directive and not impose our stuff on somebody else's reality. So maybe that's all going on. So we may be actively, consciously marginalizing them. Do they think they're being marginalized? No, because to
No.
them, we don't exist.
Mhm.
So I guess what I'm trying to say is that maybe marginalization is how all cultures started. They didn't know they were marginalized, but they were just out there doing their thing. And someone else noticed them. And did they notice them and decide to ignore them and leave them be? Or did they notice them and decide that they needed to be somehow conquered or taken advantage of in some way? What was driving this? So what's going in the mind of someone who focuses on separation, assimilation, marginalization? That line of questioning, that line of thought is definitely what helps us to overlay this on the change grid. Yeah, so thoughts about that, or any thoughts about any of these combos?
That's a tough one because I think contextually it could be applied in so many different ways. Even like within business, you're still talking about people, bottom line. Any business is a
Right.
collective of people. So you can, I can understand the integration and even some of the others, but I'm trying to wrap my head around why would not the organization want integration, right?
Oh,
Why
I
would-
can tell you exactly why. Because integration involves a sharing of power, and that host culture has to be of the mindset that sharing power is to its maximum benefit, ultimate benefit. If they believe that I just need to have the appearance of sharing control and sharing all that direction, how many times has a company been described as going through a merger when all of us in the business know there is no such thing as a merger, there is only an acquisition. And we can pretend it's a merger, and there might be aspects of it that are going to get integrated. But bottom line, one of those businesses has got a lot more power than the other one, and they're very unlikely to sacrifice that power. Am I right, or am I crazy? What do you guys agree?
Oh, no, totally agree with you.
Yeah, so
That
that's
explains a
and,
lot
and
to
it's
me then.
assimilation is the power focus in this group.
Yeah.
Interesting. That
Yeah,
I
explains
think
why
T-
there's so much sustainable mediocrity then, because it just makes sense to, I lived in countries where people feel disenfranchised, and you'll see in product like January 6th, you'll see in product of silos that become like revolutionists and rogue kind of behaviors, because you can only take for so much, and when people get sick and tired of being sick and tired, they come out fighting. And we see these in organizations, whereas it's just disruptive to the organization ultimately. So I'm not understanding why they don't develop these kinds of people skills to really have people, create environments where people can be the best version of who they are.
Because that's terrifying to the majority of people in power.
Yeah, Brian, what you're bringing up in the business context is interesting too, because I think people that are down in marginalization are also down on the change grid in apathy, and they're kind of comfortable where they are. They're collecting their paycheck, and they're not on anybody's radar, and they're fine with that. But when the host culture decides that there's somebody down there that they really need because they have a skill set or something, and they start to shine a light on that individual, that person is no longer being marginalized. And it's not necessarily of their own choosing. It's the host culture that's creating that attention.
Right.
And I think that's what's happening in a societal type of aspect as well, is you have people that are being fed enough that they're comfortable so that they don't rise up, because the moment that they rise up, you have a revolution.
Yep, absolutely. You
That's
must
good.
control the population, because everyone feeling empowered is a horrifically dangerous and unmanageable situation. Just, I mean, it's a wonderful thing to spiritually aspire to. I don't know that it's ever been actually tested in anything other than maybe a commune sort of a situation, or a kibbutz sort of a situation, something where someone has deliberately structured a community within a community.
I think you'd have anarchy.
Yeah, Indian reservations are an example of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, even the
or Ukraine, even something place like Ukraine.
And so let's for a second figure out, how does this overlay on the change grid? Because you have to look at it from two different perspectives. From the perspective of the native culture, they are going to feel like they've either been integrated, assimilated, marginalized, or separated. So let's talk about where that energy, that feeling that I've just described, resides in each. And by the way, you're looking at a regular change grid diagram. This doesn't necessarily have to stretch all the way out to the extremes. It could really be something that's confined into a much tighter sort of a place. But nevertheless, these four words or actions can be described energetically. So now, Boris just said that the people that are marginalized are down grid. And I'm going to go, wait a minute. And
they sound in grid if they are down grid. If they're rejecting everything, their own culture and the other culture, then it's kind of like, you sound like in grid.
And here's what
I was just going to say, I see the labels as fitting along the different sides of the change grid. So where you have perceived ability, that is the kind of the marginalization axis, I guess. Yep. And then the perceived challenge side of the grid is kind of where the separation happens. Then the opposite of that would be the towards going out grid, right? That bottom piece would be the what were the other two?
That the separation,
assimilation, and then integration would be the top side.
Interesting.
Have I had this whole conversation without showing this diagram? No, I've been showing this diagram, right?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah.
I've had one of those moments. All right, so I think you guys are definitely on the right track. So let me just kind of throw out there what I think the overlay is. And then I'd like you guys to kind of debate it and discuss it and all that, because I think you're absolutely on the right track. I believe that it was Kathy who said that integration is really the ultimate goal, at least the goal that's put forward. And maybe it's coming from a place of great nobility, and maybe it's coming from a place of, an increasingly quiet, what's where do I want to put it, agenda. That they have their own little quiet agenda, but you're still, integration is at least recognized as being the way to move someone in the direction they want them to go. So I want to create this feeling, this belief that you have been fully integrated, that integration is happening. That's the energy I want to awaken in members of the native culture. Where would that put them on the change grid? If they felt as though they were fully integrated, equally participating, equally moving things in a particular direction, a new and wonderful relationship based on respect and all that sort of stuff, does that feel like more in, up, down, or out grid?
So that's the out grid. That's life happens out grid, right? In
Yeah.
that green
out grid.
circle.
Now,
Yeah, out grid.
And I didn't say anything at all about danger zone. So I don't think it's going to extend to the danger zone, but I'm going to say that there may be in the mind of someone who wants to create a feeling of integration, a sinister motivation. So, and that would then kind of be a different activity elsewhere on the grid. But I'm trying to make people feel very comfortable that they are there. I've either actually done this, in which case, good for me, good for nobility, good for all the good stuff that happens out there. The world that Brian has described, that's definitely an outgrid kind of a thing. But don't think for 1 minute we're talking about all the way out to the danger zone.
Is that leader layer, or that's
Yeah,
not
well,
the
and-
influencer, that's the leader, yes?
Oh, yeah, that's definitely the leader energy, but maybe I'm better off showing this as the 16 energies, because I can kind of
Okay.
feel that it's that amiable driver. There is still a caring of what's going on with the other individual. I don't know the easiest way to show these both at once, but I guess that works. So, so I think that's what's going on, that integration is actually out grid. Now, if I just then said, well, then let's just do a simple rotation of this 45 degrees, that would mean that assimilation is down grid. So let's describe the energy of the assimilated. So the energy of the assimilated would probably be, I'm going to say, one of relatively high perceived ability and low perceived challenge. So you've just been absorbed into the machinery. You've just been, soaked into the Borg. You aren't you anymore. You are just whoever it is the situation needs you to be, doing what you need to do, and you do it well enough. So you've basically said, with the energy of assimilation, I was more than happy to assimilate my world to life in the military. Because I got good at what I was doing, and I knew what I was doing. The challenge wasn't all that high, and yeah, so I'm okay, setting aside whatever else it is. I'm a military man or whatever. Can you guys kind of feel what that assimilated state can be for the individual?
So is that analytical?
I'm saying it's more of an expressive analytical, because you remember, half of the analytical is the danger zone.
Oh, okay.
So I don't think they're that. Actually, more than half of it. It goes right through here horizontally, right above the word analytical.
Yeah, I find it easier to think about it in terms of the power grid. I mean the usual change grid.
5 levels of attention.
The 5. I'm sorry. Yes, excuse me. I should be able to articulate that by now.
Yeah, I was
five
going to
levels.
say that in truth, anytime you guys are looking at a change grid, you should just be looking at the full thing.
Right, the
But,
five
you
levels
know,
of tension. Yeah,
right,
yeah.
exactly. So certainly I would say that the assimilated have been trained, conditioned, supported to be at what levels of tension? Down here,
Mm.
power, apathy, and apathy.
Yeah, power,
Hopefully
apathy.
power apathy. So at least, you know, they're doing what I've asked them to do. And all that, they've been assimilated. Welcome to the cog of name the corporation. There you are. Welcome to the cog of name whatever it happens to be. You're there. Now you're not there necessarily. I want to say this. I believe you're there in a very much aware state. Like you kind of chose to allow yourself to be assimilated. You're kind of glad it all happened. You know, you're a happy assimilated kind of an individual. Because again, we're not talking about the dark side of things, that there is a certain way that assimilation expresses itself that is definitely the dark side. Yep. Now, that would then put the marginalized in grid. And the marginalized being in-grid makes complete sense to me because the in-grid people are marginalized. They are invisible to most people. They live, remember I said the thing about being in-grid is that no matter where you draw it, you have a full proportionate change grid available to you. Their world is much smaller. They've been marginalized. They're doing their thing. They don't know that they're being marginalized. Because the moment they start to feel something about being marginalized, they start going like, hey, wait a minute, notice me. You know, I'm here, see me, see me, see me. What are they trying to move towards? You know, so that's a different energy than the energy of the marginalized, who I believe is pretty much oblivious to what's really going on. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And then
Yes.
that would put the separated up grid. Now, to me, that makes sense because the separated feels separate. And maybe there's aspects of being separate that they're perfectly fine with, but there could be other aspects of that separation that they kind of take issue with. So why shouldn't they get A, B, or C, or why shouldn't they participate in X, Y, Z? You know, this must be how women felt when they were first going after the vote and anything having to do with rights. Any group that's going after any kind of rights has got to have started off feeling quite marginalized, quite invisible, and then they realized, I don't want to be separate. And they are separating me because now they have no choice but to acknowledge I exist. At least I made that much of an impact on the trip up the spiral dynamic. But that's it. And I do think those people are far more likely to feel more upgrid, more power stress, even stress, where
they're able to express themselves. I mean, that's where the
Yes.
expression is. They express themselves as a way of either separating or we're fighting for integration.
Right, that's exactly. I love the way you put that. They're fighting for integration. You know, I refuse to be assimilated. I want to be fully integrated. Now, maybe people who feel separated go, you know, the easiest way to move up in the social status and the organization as to whatever is to simply allow myself on the surface to appear to have been assimilated. Because Nola, remember, I got to tell you, if you watch any of the histories, documentaries about the suffrage movement, and not just in the U.S. but worldwide, you're going to find that there's a whole bunch of people who are working really hard to keep you separate. So, you know, you had to be upgrid, you had to take a position, you had to take a stance, be willing to be arrested, be willing to be, you know, denigrated by so many and whatever the case may be. But for the sake of the cause, you said, nope, we will be integrated. I will not be assimilated, will not be assimilated. So I don't know. And maybe there were people who said the best way for women to gain status in society is to not cause distinctive attention to be brought to themselves, but to instead show themselves as being a cooperative member of society and, you know, who isn't a disruptive force or whatever. So any of you that are on the call that have studied that chapter of history, what do you think? Does that feel right to you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you think about the difference between Martin Luther King and Malcolm X in the movement. you know,
Yes.
in the civil rights movement and different approaches that took. And it shows ethnic nationalism. All the ethnic nationalisms around the world follow that. I mean, follow that tension model. I think this is really brilliant, Dee.
Yeah. And so now it'd be very interesting. And again, I've not given much other than passing thought to this. What happens if these become, you know, problem? Because right now, I think that these are all for being done deliberately by a certain mindset. And obviously it's an outgrid mindset. Maybe it's the outgrid danger zone mindset, who really is trivializing everybody other than the degree to which they're perceived as being useful to them. And so certain groups, an outgrid danger zone person may decide to actively marginalize, to actively keep separate, or allow them to only have the illusion of being part of something, of being integrated, because that's necessary to get more of what the outgrid danger zone person wants. So maybe the outgrid danger zone person says, all I really need is a little army of people who do exactly what they were told and don't cause me any trouble. So maybe they're trying to assimilate others, or even apply this to the way businesses interact with one another. If you are a competitor and you're annoying enough, maybe the easiest way for me to get rid of you is to absorb you, to buy you out. And yeah, I'll make everyone think it's a merger and an integration, but basically I'm just getting rid of you. And whatever I like that you did have, I'll assimilate. But no, you don't matter anymore. You're gone. And all your employees are only going to stick around long enough that I find them useful. And then they're gone. So that, you know, I believe that these all four at their ugliest live at the outgrid danger zone. And I believe that at their finest, because I do believe there are people who want the best when it comes to integration. I mean, the world, again, that Brian was describing, I have to believe exists in whatever size, whatever place, it's in whatever people's minds. I know that reality exists, but is it really the reality that we encounter out there on a daily basis?
No,
No. So
that's
the
my
person,
optimism.
yeah, well, I think that the person who's doing the best job of managing these most effectively is where on the change grid?
Always in the center.
Always in the center. It's this person in the center who is saying, I see the marginalized, I see the separated, I see those that are allowing themselves to be assimilated, and then those that are really wanting to be integrated into what's going on. I see all of you. And I appreciate and understand what you're going through. And because of me being centered, I do have insights to offer you that can help you to better understand what's really going on as these interact with. We've been talking about things interacting along the sides. What about diagonally? What's going on?
Yeah.
That's also a
Yeah.
big issue.
T,
So,
can you
Been
put
reading
up
my
the
journal.
yeah, there you go. Right. Which one?
T, can you put up the chart with the labels, you know, expressive driver, driven driver, all of
Oh,
that?
yeah. Yeah. if I
And
can remember where
and
it
I
is.
think what you're describing, to me at least, lives in the square in the middle box, the analytical expressive, the amiable driver, the expressive
Yeah.
analytical, and the driven
That's right.
amiable.
That's right. Because this is an evolved person.
Yeah,
This-
if you took the boxes and you said, well, integration would be the amiable driver,
yeah.
right? You just twist the boxes around and they fit squarely in that
Yeah.
center
If you're
piece.
thinking that the person who's doing the best of these four is leaning towards amiable driver because they're trying
Yes,
to do it deliberately.
integration would live in amiable driver.
Absolutely. They're right there.
Marginalization would be the driven amiable,
Amiable.
The
right?
driven amiable. Wait, where am I?
Right. Which is the opposite,
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. These are the marginalized.
right?
Absolutely.
And then the assimilation would be the expressive analytical,
Right.
and separation would be the analytical expressive.
That's right. That's right. And I think that when we start looking at that as being like, this is the world we're observing, or the world that the person who lives in the center, who's actually trying to be that observant, is appreciating what's really going on. And again, if it's happening at the societal level, it's also happening inside of the individual. So
Mhm.
that person in the middle is probably doing the best job of recognizing when they're being integrated, marginalized, separated, and assimilated, as the case may be.
And the word that comes to my mind is polarization. So the more outgrid, not outgrid necessarily, but to more extremes they get, right?
Yep.
The expressive or the driven driver.
Mhm.
Those are the individuals that are polarizing not only to an individual maybe, but to the whole organism.
Absolutely. And so when I think about the marginalized, a marginalized individual sitting at 5'5" has got to be a very different experience than the marginalized individual sitting at 1'1".
Yeah, the
Yeah.
one that's sitting at 1'1" is probably the person that Brian was describing, that there's a revolution coming.
That's right.
Yeah.
And the person that I'm describing being oblivious to it has got to be by definition at 0'0".
Yeah.
I mean, so I think that you're absolutely right there, that as I move away from the center in any direction, I am basically allowing for, anticipating, creating increasing levels of imbalance. Honestly, if we go to this layer, you kind of see it, because
Mhm.
I'm moving people who everything you've just described is inside of the green circle.
Mhm.
And as I start to have this, these four become more problematic, I'm going to move into daily living between the green circle and the red circle. But at a certain point, they can all be pushed beyond. Yeah. Anyway, there's certainly a lot to talk about around this. So hopefully you guys are finding this interesting. And we can certainly pick up where we left off last time around. I am interested in exploring the diagonal relationships. And I am interested in looking at some of the other layers just to find out what's going on. Because here's the thing that we're saying: if this can all occur in the center, this is a beneficial progress. Is this a process that people move through? Is it something that maps to the spiral, or is this just four different possibilities that an individual may encounter, and they aren't necessarily sequential? They're much more random or dependent on other things. So hopefully you guys are enjoying this level. I mean, this is what I live for, is anything having to do with the merging of brilliance. So to be able to find something that I know has been around for a very long time. I don't know how long Barry's been doing Barry's stuff, but it's the first time I've seen it. And
Interesting.
it's a very interesting thing. But while I appreciate the model as it is, and I see the usefulness of it as it is, when we integrate it into the change grid, does it not become something that is dynamic rather than static?
Right, because you get to see what's underneath some of this stuff, and that
Right.
becomes more important, actually.
Yeah. So, I love it. The merging of brilliance is what I live for. So I'm glad that we were able to
Thank you.
new model for me and do that. So anyway, there you go. We'll pick up where we left off last time around. So yeah, so thanks everybody, and we'll talk again very soon. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.